Russian dictator Vladimir Putin recently visited command center of the Russian army in the Kursk region.
Yes.
He was wearing a military uniform.
Yes.
Do you see this as a kind of message to the West that he does not want to stop this war? He would like to move forward, to continue?
I'm not sure that picture was for an international audience. His uniform was very clean. It was not faded. Most military uniforms, the darker green becomes lighter and lighter when you wash it lots of times. His was very new, very clean. He looked an old man in that military uniform. It did not look like the uniform of a fighting man. He looked, how old is he? 74 years old now? He looked that old in those pictures. And it's the first time he's visited Kursk ever since Ukraine moved in there. I think that was much more for a domestic audience, for his Russian audience that says, who've been saying, why had you allowed Russia to be invaded? Why had you not protected Russia? And because Putin did not know when he would be able to seize the territory back, he did not visit. I think he's very confident now that his military are about to push Ukraine out. So now he wants to associate himself in military uniform with a great Russian victory. And I think that's for his domestic audience. I don't think anybody in the West is taking any notice at all of what he wears. However this war finishes, President Putin will want to demonstrate to the Russian people that this has been a great victory for Russia, that it's been worth the sacrifice, it's been worth the cost, it's been worth the inflation, the effect on the economy. And I think he is preparing the ground for being able to demonstrate that he was the great Russian leader, he was the great Russian wartime leader that delivered this great victory to his nation. I think that's what that picture was all about.
Don't you think that it was a little bit funny because he is not a military man wearing a military uniform, he didn't fight wars? What is your take on that?
He's not the only Russian leader who has not fought in the military but wears military uniform. And that's why I don't think that was for an international audience. I think that was much more for a domestic Russian audience. One thing that we in the West struggle with is that is understanding just how much Russia controls the media. I'm here from United Kingdom, I'm here in Ukraine in this fabulous hangar with lots of old aircraft in it, and as a former pilot I love being in this environment. But we tend to forget that a lot of what Vladimir Putin is doing, he controls all of the media. I'm here to help you and to help Ukraine, but Vladimir Putin controls everything in Russia. They hear what he wants to tell them. He tells them that they're on the front foot. He doesn't tell them about the casualties. He doesn't tell them that Russia started this war. He tells them all a very different story. And I think that's where we have to watch some of his actions and how he dresses, because that's very much for his domestic audience.
Also, you mentioned that he was looking quite old. Do you believe that it was really Vladimir Putin?
I know there are a lot of people who suggest that there may be doppelgangers, 2 or 3 or 4 Vladimir Putins. I don't like getting involved. I'm a military man. Does it make any difference to the strategy? No, it doesn't. I think if you were a soldier on the ground and you had met Vladimir Putin before, and then another Vladimir Putin arrived, you'd know it was not the real one. And that, I think, would be very difficult because the rumors would spread quickly. I do recognize that Vladimir Putin needs to protect himself. He knows that he may well be an unpopular leader within the military, because the military are the people who have lost a lot of lives. The way that the Russian forces fight on the front line means that they accept massive casualties, but it does deliver advancement on the battlefield. a lot of soldiers will have lost a lot of friends, a lot of colleagues. So I suspect Vladimir Putin would want to be very careful if he visited the front line with soldiers, with guns, with bullets. He would not want to give anybody the chance to wreak revenge against him.
From your perspective, I have discussed this issue with many former military leaders, experts. From your perspective, does Vladimir Putin regret invading Ukraine?
I think that's a really good question. I look back at February 22, when Russian forces massed near the Ukrainian border and then made a push against Kyiv, and that 40-mile convoy and reports that many of the Russian soldiers had their dress uniform with them because they expected to be welcomed into Kyiv and with flowers. And thank you for...
It was failure in intelligence.
Well, a massive failure of intelligence. And that would have been very humiliating for President Putin. He always called it that special military operation. And what we saw is the war has moved backwards and forwards. But what is clear now is that President Putin is securing that land bridge of the 4 regions of the Donbass, Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia and Kherson, linking to Crimea. And that gives much more security for the vital port of Sevastopol for Russia. I think if you look back, I think Russia would not have expected 3 years on to still be fighting. But I think Vladimir Putin sees his place in history. In his offices, there are big statues of Peter the Great and some heroes of the former Soviet Union. I think he sees his place in history as retaking some of those nations that were once the Soviet Union. And sort of whilst he probably didn't expect it to be this difficult, if you look at it through a different lens, he might have been very scared of NATO. I think he's less scared of NATO now because he's managed to scare Western politicians to not get involved. I think he's formed new relationships with Iran, with North Korea, with China. So in some respects, I think he might believe he is making Russia great again. And I know that sounds strange from where we sit in Ukraine, but this is all about his own audience, his own history, as he writes history, his chapter of it. So yes, I think he will be surprised it took so long, but I think strategically he will be very pleased with what has happened so far.
I would like also to cover with you possible scenarios in case of a ceasefire deal. If Russia accepts a ceasefire deal in the nearest future, can Russia violate this deal and try to decapitate Ukrainian government by making, for example, a great push to capture Kyiv or Sumy?
I think the question here is, it's one thing having a ceasefire, it's quite another how you provide the security environment to stop Russia doing this again. I think many in the West, I think particularly President Trump, just sees this as an opportunity to stop the fighting, stop the killing. As a military guy, unless you solve the problem, you don't end the war. The battle may stop, but you don't end the war. And last time I came to Ukraine in October, I was reminded several times that this war didn't start in 2022. It didn't start in 2014. Russia in various forms has been attacking Ukraine for 300 years and trying to destroy its people, its language, its culture, its civilization. And that Russia won't stop. So pausing the war with a ceasefire will never be the answer. The answer has to be a robust security environment in that post-war time. And that, I think, is the most difficult conversation. I think President Zelensky has recognized he needs American help and therefore agreed to negotiate, but he's been very clear, I cannot allow my country to agree a peace unless we have something very robust in terms of security environment. And I was reminded when I came here last time, I remember history, 1994, the Budapest Memo, Ukraine was the third largest nuclear power, and Ukraine agreed to give back its nuclear weapons in return for a cast iron guarantee about the sovereignty of the country. 20 years later, Putin moves in and the West largely does nothing about it. That memory will not allow President Zelensky to accept a signature on a bit of paper. It has to be something more robust. And I think that is something that America, the West, Europe, my country, is trying to work out. How do you provide that security environment? And of course, President Putin is going to say no, because he will want to maintain the option of having another bite at Ukraine in the future.
My first question would be about this security guarantees for Ukraine. How would you like to see this robust security guarantees for Ukraine, and can the United Kingdom, France and other European allies provide Ukraine with enough security without American commitment, without US backstop?
Yeah, it's a very difficult question. And one of the reasons I think it is so difficult is if you look at it in detail. Let's take one example. One military assessment said that we would need to have a force of 100,000 soldiers in Ukraine to provide that security guarantee. My country, we have 74,000 soldiers in the British Army, so it feels like we're almost there. But if you look at how many of our soldiers can be deployed, because some of them are doing training, some of them are in logistics, some of them, it's about 35,000 that can be deployed.
Only British troops.
I'm just talking about British troops now. And if you wanted to have an enduring presence in Ukraine, let's supposing they were there for 4 months at a time, you'd have to have one team deployed, another team preparing to deploy, and the team that's just come back having some holiday and a break. So you need to have 3 units, 3 times the number of forces that are actually deployed there. If you have 30,000 available, that means you can only support 10,000 on the ground at any one time. So if the United Kingdom can only do 10,000, let's supposing France and Germany can do a similar number, that still isn't half of the forces that are needed. So where do the rest of the forces come from? Poland is spending a lot more money on defence now, but if I was Polish, I'd be more worried about defending my country than putting forces into Ukraine. And there are some countries like Italy which are still not taking this very seriously at all. So practically, it's very difficult. I think the one thing that and we heard our British Prime Minister talking to this, is we didn't want to get involved with a no-fly zone at the start of the war, but I do think a no-fly zone would be a very effective way of stopping Russia advancing. Western technology in air is far better than Russia, and Russia has shown how it operates for the last 3 years. The West has been sucking all that information up. It now understands much better how all of these weapons, Kinzhal, some of the high-end weapons. So I think that would be a very effective way of contributing to some form of post-war security environment. But it's not easy.
Yes, we are hearing air alert. It could be a sign that Vladimir Putin is not really happy about a ceasefire proposal from US President Donald Trump. It even could be a sign that Vladimir Putin tried to humiliate Donald Trump because he continued to attack Ukraine after this big best offer from US President Donald Trump.
Yes, I think there's a danger sometimes that we react to everything that happens each day. There is a war going on, and Vladimir Putin and his forces will be looking to do everything possible to achieve their objectives. They're not stopping. We haven't agreed a ceasefire. They will keep pushing hard. And I suspect we would do exactly the same if roles were reversed. I don't think Vladimir Putin would want to humiliate President Trump. He would not want to make an enemy of the biggest superpower in the world. I believe a number of military analysts who think that the West has done enough to stop Ukraine losing, but has not done enough to help it win. And military forces in the West are far more powerful than Russia. If we were to get involved, Russia would be stopped straight away. And if Putin was to make an enemy of President Trump, and Trump suddenly decided to say, right, we're going to get involved, that would not be something that Russia would want. Putin has, every step of the way, has tried to scare the West not to get involved. So I'd be very surprised if Putin wants to insult President Trump. President Trump offers him a way out. It offers President Putin an off-ramp, a way to end the war. I'd be very surprised if he wants to humiliate him.